Welcome to the Adjusters Roundtable. We're here today with somebody that I'm very happy to introduce you to. This is Tyler Rambo. Tyler is our National Director of Sales, and he's also a public adjuster with our company. Tyler's licensed in Florida and Texas. He's settled over $15 million in new money claims for our clients. Tyler also has a successful background in insurance sales prior to joining our company. Tyler, we're really happy to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. And Tyler flew in from Texas today. It was a long day, so yeah, we're ready to get right to it. The topic that we really want to address today and really educate policyholders about is an interesting one to me, and it's one that's been evolving in the industry over the last couple of years. And the topic is, who is the decision maker in an insurance claim, and what drives claim delays? When people have damage to their property, the anticipation is for a quick response and payment from an insurance company. But we're seeing more often than not that that's not really the case anymore. There is a case study that I wanted to talk about today, and it's a particular claim that I will personally never forget that Tyler handled. And we still talk about to this day, even though it's happened some time ago now. The facts as best I remember about this particular claim. The client sustained extensive damage from a hurricane loss. Tyler successfully presented this claim to the insurance company, and to the point where a representative left you a voicemail stating that a substantial payment was forthcoming based upon Tyler's efforts representing this claim. As I understand, the payment did not arrive as anticipated, and obviously that started to raise some red flags. Tyler did a phenomenal job of crossing that hurdle and getting the client to the finish line and getting this payment. But this is a story that I'm excited for everyone to hear, because I know it's something that unfortunately other people are potentially dealing with. And I'd just love to hear a little bit Tyler's perspective on what happened and how you were able to overcome some of those delays in the claim. So Tyler, tell us all about it.
Yeah, that was an interesting claim. It kind of started off seemingly like any other. It was a Category 5 hurricane, so the damage was substantial. Had initially gone out there, done the initial inspection with the adjusters, the field adjusters that the insurance company had hired to go out there. Again, the damage was, it was obvious. It was clear and obvious. Here you go. They submitted that to the desk adjuster. I had good rapport with the desk adjuster. Desk adjuster had kind of initially suggested that the claim was going to get resolved pretty quickly, and then it didn't. Kind of like a lot of claims, then you start kind of getting into the minutia of the claim, and you go, okay, I was hopeful, to get this resolved. I'm trying to have clear communication with the client. I'm trying to relay what's going on, but then, sometimes, in these claims, it's not clear, ourselves. And so I'm following up with the desk adjuster because, like I said, we had good rapport. The damage was clear. We had written a very concise estimate that was representative of the damages. It felt like everybody was on the same page, and then it was, us trying to figure out why aren't we at resolution at this point. The funny thing is, I started reaching out to the desk adjuster, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm going to run it up the chain." And he starts talking about his manager, and he said, "Yeah, I'll talk to Randy about it." And I said, "Okay." And he said, it was always this optimistic, we're going to get this thing resolved. I'm going to talk to Randy. I'm going to run it up the chain, and we'll get this thing, taken care of. And so, of course, my job is to relay that information to, my client. So I'm saying, hey, he sounded optimistic. We have good rapport. I feel optimistic. Again, the damage is very clear. I'm hoping that we can get this resolved. And then the desk adjuster would come back and he would say, "Oh man, I really went to bat for you. I ran it up to Randy, and Randy shot it down." So, I'm going, okay. And so we're going through several rounds of this, and we're going through re-inspections, which is not altogether uncommon to have to do re-inspections, but there was something that started to seem a little off, where you and I actually were going back and forth, and I was saying, Josh, I'm kind of getting this impression that maybe Randy isn't real.
Right.
I've just got this funny feeling.
I'll never forget that.
And it would almost be comical if we weren't dealing with, a real person's life.
Right.
Like if this was not somebody's actual home that was damaged, that, they had I remember they had actual holes in the exterior from concrete roofing that had blown through. So I mean, it was
Substantial.
crazy. Yeah,
It was damaged trusses, and yeah, it was bad.
it was bad.
Yeah.
And this person's trying to live in that situation. That was their home. And so, I'm sitting here dealing with, this Randy character and keep getting shot down by this, this guy, Randy. You and I kind of started joking. And it was like, well, if he's in trouble, maybe it's just his desk mate. Maybe it's somebody saying, oh, you don't know what to do yet, just blame it on Randy.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of riffing back and forth and kind of creating these scenarios about who, how this Randy character may have come about, if he was real or not, and it wasn't clear at the time. And so we go through all the things. I mean, adjust the claim, never wavered. Our job doesn't change. It's, hey, we're going to push the information that we've got. We had all of our, photos. We're pushing towards, any post-loss obligations that the client may have. We're trying to continue to fulfill those and work towards, whatever the next steps are, so that we can get the claim resolved and work towards settling the claim, in a way that's fair for the client. And so we get to that point. I had a follow-up, conversation. We had re-inspections, and the desk adjuster and we had negotiated the claim. And I remember he called me up and said, I got approval. We're good for the amount that he and I agreed upon. I had taken that to the client. I asked the client, do you agree to settle at this amount? Client was thrilled. He said, yes, we can settle at that amount and get this claim resolved. Okay, great. I think I've done my job. Everyone's happy. Yeah. Now we're waiting for the check, and I'm following up, and it's been a month. And I still haven't heard anything. And I've been following up quite a bit with I gave the desk adjuster every opportunity. I was calling and, regular phone calls, regular emails, documenting the claim. It seems like we're good. And after a month, it was just like, what else are you supposed to do? I haven't, it went from us having great rapport, speaking with each other all the time, to all of a sudden, hey, I've got this voicemail where he says we're good. He stated the amount that, we were good for.
Right.
So the clear expectation is that, the check would be in the mail, and a month later we're going, all right, well, I guess I got to call Randy. So I called the general line because I couldn't get through to the desk adjuster. It had been, a month, and I hadn't been able to get through to him at all. So I called the general line and said, hey, here's the name of the desk adjuster. I need to speak with his supervisor. I need the supervisor's contact information. He said that his supervisor's name was Randy.
Right.
And the claims rep was kind of, you could tell they were a little confused, and they said, what did you say the supervisor's name was? I said, well, the desk adjuster told me that their supervisor's name was Randy. And he's kind of laughing, and he goes, no. He gives me a name that was nowhere close. I mean, it couldn't.
Right. No mistaking.
No mistaking. This other name for this guy Randy, and so at that point, I called the client and I let him know, and so I was able to actually speak with the with the actual supervisor at that point. So had spoken with them and let him know what the situation was, and you could tell actually the supervisor was frustrated with the amount. I said, hey, look, I have a voicemail from your desk adjuster that said that he had gotten approval for this amount. The client's already agreed to it.
In terms of it being too substantial.
That was the impression that I got. You could tell that the supervisor was frustrated, all around. But what was really interesting about that conversation was that I said, hey, I have this voicemail. He said, you have a voicemail? And he said, do you still have that voicemail? And I said, absolutely, I still have that voicemail.
Yeah.
He goes, are you going to send it to me? I said, are you going to send me the check?
Yeah.
and he goes, if you send me that voicemail, I have to. I said, yeah. And so I did provide that voicemail. There was clear documentation of, the amount that we had agreed upon.
Right.
And check shows up magically, pretty quickly after that.
Yep.
No thanks in part to Randy.
Yeah. Who may or may not have ever existed.
Yeah,
leaning towards not. And that's great job, by the way, first and foremost, of, overcoming the hurdle of something that didn't even exist, right? And it's sad that, to be honest with you, that it's become such a common term for us to use. Does Randy even exist? Where's Randy out there when it comes to processing claims for clients, and something that a lot of policyholders deal with now, where they're trying to even find out, like we said, who is the decision maker on my claim. We see some new, and I hate to call it tactics, but claims practices where it looks like claims are open and closed, and new examiners are assigned, and every time an examiner is assigned, it takes them several days to review the file, and then they chart their own course, whether it's bringing in more third-party entities to provide them with an opinion on what the value of the claim is or what the next course is. And so you have people that are chasing Randy's all the time, and like I said, it is really sad because people are suffering. They need the benefit of the insurance they purchased, and the last thing that should be happening is that they're chasing somebody that may even not even exist, right? And so that's something that we want to bring to light today, that claim delays occur. Why do they occur, and how can you resolve that? And really, first and foremost, Tyler, in relaying that story to you, definitely showed how his persistence, how providing the documentation first and foremost to get that initial response was so important, because that's what he was able to go back and rely upon to actually effectuate that payment actually being issued, right? And so we talk about that often, these examiners constantly being reassigned, third-party adjusters being assigned, and then just, wearing you out through the process. It's a tough thing, right? It's a tough thing to see clients go through.
Absolutely. What's interesting is that was years ago. That was earlier, in my career. And at that time, I was fortunate to at least have that one desk adjuster or examiner, depending on what term you want to use. But I had that same person all the way through the claim. So, that was kind of a saving grace in some sense. But that's become a lot more uncommon. Mm-hmm. So, our job is not to be adversarial. At least I don't approach it that way. I felt like I had great rapport with that desk adjuster. He and I were actively working towards, providing all the documentation to help him substantiate, whatever he needed to settle the claim with me. I mean, we were working to adjust the claim together, and I was working to provide that information, on behalf of my client to, help him also with his job. But I was fortunate to feel like, hey, this is the same, desk adjuster, and whether or not, it was the same supervisor or not, or if the supervisor was even real,
right?
That's up for debate, But have noticed a shift in the industry where, like you said, hey, all of a sudden, for this one claim, you may have, it's not uncommon. I think on a lot of my claims recently, there's 5 different desk adjusters.
Yeah, that's wild.
And it's not an exaggeration or being hyperbolic at all. It's and like you said, every single time,
Mm-hmm.
It starts kind of that process. At least they say that it starts the process over for them.
Sure.
And then there's been a lot of instances where, the general claims, they won't even provide the supervisor's, contact information when
Mm-hmm.
I've asked for it, when I've tried to, keep the claim moving. So I can't imagine, I just can't imagine being a homeowner who's never gone through that before,
Right.
especially when the damage is that substantial. And, maybe there's been a lot of instances where the homeowner can't even live in the home anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't even know who the desk adjuster is, and trying to figure out who's who in this whole scenario. So, if you were doing that alone, and all the while, I think in most of those instances, there's this reasonable expectation that, hey, this adjuster, this person that works for the insurance company is going to give me the next steps to where we can, find resolution together.
Right, yeah.
How are you supposed to get to those next steps if, it keeps changing hands that often?
Right.
So I can't imagine, sitting back in that type of scenario as a property owner and going,
Mm-hmm.
hey, this is my home. This is where we have our memories. This is where, I'm raising my children, or, whatever the scenarios are, and going, I'm waiting for this person to help me. I'm waiting for this person to give me instructions. I'm waiting for, whatever it is that we need to do to find resolution, and that keeps changing hands like that. If I was doing it on my own, or, if I was a homeowner, that would, I could see how that would feel like a pretty helpless situation.
Right. And that's kind of the point of the topic that we're having here today. Who is the decision maker? Like, can you even get to the decision maker anymore? And if you find them, are they going to give you the guidance, direction, and comfort you need to walk you through that claims process, right?
That's, and again, we're talking about shifts in the industry. The earlier in my career, when I would have those initial inspections with a field adjuster, so whether it was a third-party adjuster, whether it was a staff adjuster, they had a lot more autonomy, or at least they had the experience to where they said, hey, I'm boots on the ground. I'm going to be writing this estimate. I'm working with you. You take me through the damages. You present the damages, that are being claimed. And when I write my estimate on behalf of the insurance company, we have a lot of sway to help get this claim resolved. And lately that shift has gone from, those guys saying, hey, we have a ton of experience. The desk adjuster, once, I'm the field adjuster, and once I submit my estimate to the desk adjuster, we'll be in pretty close communication. So if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to either one of us, and we'll work to, to resolve this thing and come to an agreement on what the damages were, from the claim. And now it seems like the shift in the industry has been, hey, those field adjusters are saying, I'm the eyes and ears only. They don't have any sway. You can tell. I mean, there's a lot of frustration in their voices also,
Right.
where they say, hey, I would love to get this. I see what you're presenting, and I agree with you on site. However, we've been instructed, or there's a company policy that, they're not going to allow for this. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to get this included, even though I agree that there's damage here. I'm just the eyes and ears. I write an estimate. I'm required to submit my estimate within a certain time frame. And then that's that. And I have no pull whatsoever once it gets in the hands of the desk adjuster. And then, like we've already talked about, once it gets in the hands of the desk adjuster, they're saying, hey, look, I got to get approval from management now. Where the desk adjuster before, it went from the field adjuster to the desk adjuster,
Right.
and then I was working with the desk adjuster, closely, and then the supervisor would only really get involved if there was a bigger disagreement, or once it came time to, hey, we've got these numbers, and I'm just waiting on final approval. It was just a final approval when the management would get involved potentially. And now that's completely shifted, where it's the field adjuster saying, I don't have any sway over this anymore. I'm the eyes and ears. I submit an estimate, and that's that. The desk adjuster is now saying that they don't have any sway in the claim either. Right. They have to wait on supervisor's approval. So we'll be sitting there with the claim being stagnant, and I'm saying, hey, what are the next steps? We have a big delta between this initial estimate that the field adjuster said that they didn't have any sway over. And you're saying you got to wait on a supervisor. Well, what's the supervisor's decision?
Right.
How do I get to the supervisor? Well, they're not providing. They won't even at least give me a Randy. At
Right.
least give me a
Yeah.
name. At least make me feel
Give me some
like
morbid fuzzies, right?
Something, right? To where I feel like, hey, I can tell the client that this thing's moving along, and it just seems like everyone's kind of kicking the can. Hey, I don't have any sway over this claim anymore. I don't have any responsibility, or not responsibility, but I don't have the autonomy to help make a decision anymore, and work directly with you to adjust the claim.
Yeah.
So it's not even who's calling the shots, who's even adjusting the claim anymore.
Yeah.
How are we,
It's crazy to me how we even got there, because I'm
Yeah.
going to put us in the Wayback Time machine for a second.
Sure.
Been doing this for 25 years, right? When I initially started as an adjuster working for insurance companies, I had the authority to go out to a client's house when I was assigned a claim to observe the damage. I was trained in policies. I could write an estimate for the damage and actually print and hand a check to my client on site. Just to think how far we've come from the beginning of my career to, then it became field adjusters, and then it became field adjusters going to the examiners, and the authority keeps shifting, right? And it's probably a good time to explain that too, just the different entities that can be involved in a claim. So you've got staff adjusters that work directly for insurance companies. You've got independent adjusters who also work for insurance companies, but are often conflated as being kind of independent in terms of unbiased, right? I have a hard time saying unbiased with that, because I used to be an independent adjuster, and my paycheck was cut by the insurance companies, not by the policyholder. So as much as I wanted to do right by my client, I knew that at the end of the day, the insurance company I was working for, their rules and guidelines, like Tyler was saying, I might want to put this in there, I might feel obligated to put that in there, but if these rules and guidelines that are being presented to me don't afford that, then that's what I have to go by. And then there's public adjusters. So public adjusters, Tyler and myself, right? We solely represent policyholders in their behalf to prepare and present their insurance claim, so that you can effectuate not only a good monetary settlement, but we talk about this a lot. It's really about duties after loss nowadays. So one of the things that's going to help press the insurance company to bring Randy to the forefront and make a decision is complying with your duties after loss. Now, anytime that you suffer a claim, you're on the clock, right? So you're on the clock to comply with whatever those duties after loss are. And those, in certain circumstances, can have very short time frames. We've seen recently or there's policies that have a 30-day time frame from when you have a claim filed, or you actually the date that you suffered the loss, to prepare and present pretty substantial documents to the insurance company. And even under, like you said, it can be such a complicated process, just understanding who's the field adjuster, who's the staff adjuster, who's the desk examiner, where's Randy in all this, right? And that's part of really, I feel, what the value that we bring to a client is in pulling the veil back on all of that and saying, hey, listen, every one of these claims is kind of nuanced in its own direction, but we have a process that we use on every single claim that is proven to be successful and that provides that clarity, that guidance to our clients, that gives them the comfort that, the insurance company might be pulling all these shenanigans, but at the end of the day, we know that Tyler's got our back, he knows how this process works, and he's going to get the result no matter what type of rug pull occurs throughout the process. We're gonna get to the finish line. And I think it's really important that people understand that this is a real situation that you can face when you file a claim. And these are things that you really do need to be aware of can come into play.